Today's scripture comes from the book of Ruth, chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. This is the word of God. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for you, that you may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good. Let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you were wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. This is the word of God.
I know it's got a little bit of interruption from this passage. I preached on this 3 weeks ago. And it's an extraordinary story, and I'm not going to really go over everything that happened here because I already preached on that. So if you missed that, I want to ask you to go ahead and listen to that sermon. And I know it's a little tough because I'm going to basically just pick up from that and without covering it. But let me just quickly review this part. So I taught you a few weeks ago that back then there was a practice of how to provide for the widows and thus recoup the land, which is called redeeming. And one who is related can then offer to marry the widow. And so in this extraordinary story in chapter 3, Ruth makes herself incredibly vulnerable. And this super dramatic moment where she goes in the middle of the night and effectively proposes to this man. And we get this story, and that's what we're talking about today. But what I really want to talk about, that's what we talked about 3 weeks ago, but what I want to talk about today is an application of this story. One of the reasons I actually wanted to preach through the book of Ruth is that as I look around our culture today, marriage and love and dating, even the hope for love, it's incredibly broken today. One of the reasons, and maybe one of the biggest reasons why young people are so depressed and even suicidal is because they don't have a pathway to find love. And when I was reading this and meditating on this before I came to a conclusion that the Lord I thought that the Lord really wanted me to push through this book, I realized how incredibly relevant this chapter and this story is for today's modern 21st century, where young people feel very, very much at a loss. Now, so if you're an older person here today, you're happily married, I hope this message will bless you. But this message is especially for people who are single, especially if you're young, but even if you're not young, and you wonder if you can find love. That's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about, because I think this passage has something really important to teach us that could really offer some hope and some wisdom today, okay? So that's what we're talking about. All right, so let's start. Part 1, lonely, cynical, and the marriage market. Lonely, cynical, and the marriage market. Part 2, providence and the wisdom of faith. If you don't know what the word providence is, I'll get to it in a little minute. But providence and the wisdom of faith. It's a really important thing to think about on this subject matter. And 3, the promise of covenant and particular love. So we'll go to part 1. Lonely, cynical, and the marriage market. So, in this story, what you have, it's probably not of suspense to you. There's some remarkable thing that happens in the next chapter, and we're going to get to that. But this book has what we would call, like if you're watching a movie, if it's a romance comedy, it's going to have a happy ending, okay? This book is going to have an happy ending. Boy is going to meet girl, and boy is going to get girl, right? And you have these two people. One is an older man, and for some reason, he never got married. Which, in this culture, is pretty unusual. It's pretty unusual why a man is particularly who seems to be wealthy, why he never got married. But there must be some reason he didn't get married. And you don't have to be too imaginative, but you could take some guesses, can't you? Why somebody could get to maybe middle age. I'm not sure how old he is, but he's probably a bit older than Ruth. And he never got married for some reason, despite the fact that he's a well-respected, prominent figure in the company. He's a leader of others, and he has significant wealth. Now, in our culture, even in our culture, if someone has that kind of standing, you would expect him to probably get married, and there'd probably be women who would want him, right? But for some reason, he didn't get married. And let me just ask you why you might think that might be. Maybe, let's just start with the shallow. Maybe it's his looks. You ever thought about that? Maybe it's his looks. Some women care about hair, okay? And maybe he didn't have good hair. You ever think? So I'm just offering some speculation why this guy Boaz didn't get married, okay? So it could be something like that. But I would think it probably isn't just that, because usually if a guy doesn't have hair but he has money, he usually could still get married, right? And I think it's pretty universal. I think there could be other things. What if there's something about his body? What if he has a scar? Or what if he was born in such a way that made him particularly unattractive? You ever thought about that? Or what if he had something that was maybe something more of an impediment? But you would think that the Bible would mention that. The Bible said that he's a worthy man, but if he had something like, let's say he had a bad leg, or if he had a scar on his face, you would think that he would mention that. But there's something about him that was he wasn't able to get married. And maybe it's simply, maybe he just never found the right person. Maybe this is a culture where probably arranged marriages was very common. Maybe his father didn't do a good job at that. Or maybe there's something about his family that made him unattractive as a figure. Let's just start right there, okay? Now, he's actually the easier person to talk about. On the other side, what we have is Ruth. And I've already told you, this is a time when there's very serious direct racism between these two cultures. She is very much an outsider. The Israelites hated the Moabites, and the Moabites hated them back. And the Moabites had a well-deserved reputation for being an evil people. I told you they practiced and worshipped a god where child sacrifice was probably pretty normal. And so, who is going to want to marry her? This is not just a culture where she's good looking, let's marry her. Or she comes from wealth, let's marry her. There's really not much that's going to make her attractive in this context. She's a widow. She's probably a little older than most eligible women. And 2, she is poor. She's very poor. And 3, of course, she's a Moabite, like I said. So why do I describe all these things to you? So I want to ask you this question. It's this question. What is the marriage market? Let's go to that next slide. What is the marriage market? You guys ever heard this? Anybody ever heard this? Anybody heard this thing because of the marriage market? Okay, sociologists actually have this term, but all of you can intuitively understand what this is. You know what the marriage market is? You guys can understand what a market is. Like, there's all these goods that are out there, and they're for sale. And when goods are out there for sale, you know what people want? They want you to show up and say, yeah, I want to buy your jacket. I want to buy this car. I want to buy whatever it is, these pants. So when my family, we went to Tokyo, you know, my daughters, they wanted to shop for good Japanese goods, okay? So they thought it was really cool. And so you can see there's all these goods that are out there. That's a market. Well, you ever think that who you are, well, there's a market. And we all do this. Oh, she's a good catch. He's not a good catch. So we operate already with the idea that there is a market. And how desirable are you? That's one of the questions that we all wonder about. And I'm raising this question here because right now in our culture, I don't know, when I was a young person in the 20s, I think everybody kind of assumed, even though we were already becoming this very post-Christian and rather sexually crass and depraved culture in my 20s. I don't think like I grew up in some nice chaste time. It was a pretty, depraved time. However, even almost all the non-Christians had hope that they would find somebody who would love them and that somebody would desire them and they would find somebody that they find desirable. Now, everybody had that hope. Everybody had that belief. If you watch the romance movies and the love stories from the 80s and the 90s, you'll see that they're mostly filled with hope. But you get down to the last 10 or 15 years, the movies change, the songs change, and the tone changes. And we're living in a time right now where I never thought even this was possible. The young people could feel so hopeless. Now, if you're not a person who's like that, good for you. But a lot of young people feel like, is there a market? Would anybody want someone like me? I forget how many years ago, maybe about a decade ago, I was reading a book by one of the brilliant sociologists of our time. His name is James Q. Wilson. He taught at Harvard for a long time. And he wrote a book called The Marriage Factor. And he wrote this book because already, we're talking, I think he wrote this book 20 years ago. I just happened to read it 10 years ago. Marriage was in trouble back then. So he wrote this book to try to help the wider culture. And he had this chapter on there that he called the marriage market. And when I read that chapter, I thought it was shocking. And here's the part that I remember. He basically talked about, the example he gave was, if you're an African-American woman, you grew up and you're like, hey, I want to marry somebody who's black. I'm black. I want to marry somebody who's black. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to be educated. I want to marry somebody who goes to college who's educated. So, yes, that's the kind of marriage I want. Doesn't that make total sense? Doesn't that make complete sense? Isn't that what you want? Generally, like begets like. You attract to certain kinds of similar kinds of people. And that's not always the exact same ethnicity, but it's pretty common. But what he pointed out was, if you actually looked at the sheer number in the black male American population, what percentage of them actually, 1, go to college, 2, finish college, and 3, are men who are willing to be faithful, who are marriable. So the percentage of women who wanted that and probably would be desirable in marriage was like this big. I mean, it was a significant number. You know what the percentage of black men who you would want, like if the number of black women in America who wanted to be married was about this big, you would want at least a similar number of black American men to be about this big, right? But what he gave you the numbers in this chapter, and that number turned out to be like this big. That's the reality of the marriage market. I'm not trying to tell this to you to scare you, okay? But this is real. And by the way, I'm not trying to just say this as an American thing. Every culture, every time, in every place, marriage is taken seriously. And as such, every man and every woman wants to end up with somebody that says, this is for life. My clan, everybody, if we screw this up, we'll be shamed, bad things happen, it'll be bad for our kids, it'll be bad for our family, etc. So people don't want to mess up this decision, and they usually have high standards about this, right? Makes sense everywhere. But here's the thing I want to say to you before I go to part 2. So this is my intro before we look at the passage. When you look at this chapter, I already gave you a description of Boaz and Ruth. Put yourself in their shoes. What was the marriage market for Ruth? She was a Moabite. This Israelite family moved into their country. She married this nice young Israelite man, and she presumably fell in love with him, but she also fell in love with their God. And the most terrible tragedy then occurred. Her father-in-law died, then her own husband died, heck, even her own brother-in-law died. But now she clung to their God, who she now knew was the real God. And so her sister-in-law, Orpah, so this is how the story goes in chapter 1, remember. So now we have three widows. You have Naomi, the mother-in-law, and then you got Ruth and Orpah, and they first say, we'll stay with you, but Naomi then tells them the sensible thing, no, go back. Go back to your moms. Ruth does the sensible thing. Orpah does the sensible thing, but Ruth says, no, I choose you. I choose your God. I choose your people. Which means I'm going to throw away my people. I'm going to lose my culture. And I will go and live with you, and probably I'll never be able to come back. So then she moves to Israel, and at a time when, if you're a widow, you're in desperate straits. So incredibly important for her to find a man and to get married. But now I want to ask you this question. What is her marriage market? Realistically, Do you think she can expect, when she left Moab and came to Israel, do you think she thought she was ever going to get married? She's probably like, I'm pretty much throwing away my life, aren't I? Because who would ever want to marry me? That was her context. Now I want to say one more thing before we go to part 2. I want to say something especially to the men. I've been reading about this, I don't know, for a certain number of years now. And I'm finding that a lot of the men are getting very cynical and angry. Because the men know they're supposed to ask the woman out. But it doesn't operate like it did when I was young, which is, you see like a pretty gal and you ask her to coffee or something like that. Apparently, I'm an old fart, so I don't know if this is true, but this is what I'm hearing, okay? If you ask a woman directly out, apparently you're considered creepy, which I think is nuts. It's like, how else is it supposed to happen, right? So everybody thinks you're supposed to do this through an app. And on the app, you're on the market. And so now your job, your income, your looks, your height, all that stuff is judged. And according to what I hear is, well, the women want a high standard, so then they look for Mr. Dreamboat. And then they cut out all the guys that don't meet that standard, right? And so that's making the men pretty upset and cynical. And so I'm not trying to blame the women or the men right now. That's a bad situation. Right? That means the market has been shrunk, and it's creating tremendous misery and loneliness. But one of the things I want to say to you today is maybe the app is not the right pathway. And maybe God could be a pathway. That's what I want to say to you today. God has His ways. God has His ways. And He knows the vast majority of you need to get married. There are some people who are very special, who have a special gift of singleness. Okay? If you're the kind of person that doesn't feel all antsy, because you're not dating somebody or want to date somebody, you might have that gift. And you know what? You're actually really blessed. But that's not most people. I mean, when I was a young man, I knew I did not have that gift. Okay? It was like, I need to get married, okay? I knew it was really, really clear. But, it's never been easy to find a godly person. Okay? And so, the market always looks bad. But today I want to let you know, here in the Bible, nobody had it worse than Ruth. And God found a way for her. You hearing me? Okay, let's go to part 2. Providence and the wisdom of faith. I want to take you to the previous chapter. So this is chapter 2, verse 1. And this is usually very overlooked, but I want you to catch this, okay? I think I kind of messed it up. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech. That's how it starts. And I told you I spent a lot of time to say there was a man, he's a worthy man. As an older man, maybe he wasn't the most attractive man in certain ways or something, but he was a single man and a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. So far, she has no idea that there's this guy named Boaz. So she's new into town, and she's going to try to go get some food. In order for now that, I hope you remember what I taught you about gleaning, you have to go onto a field and find someone who is a justice keeper, who will give you favor. It would be very normal just to get the heck out of here. Wait, aren't you a Moabite? Okay, we really don't want you. We don't We don't want any of your kind on this land. That would be the normal thing. And she's a woman. She could be under even physical violence and threat. So she's like, I need to go find somebody whose favor will be. It goes on. And she said to her, go, my daughter. Verse 3. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And here we go. She happened to come. She happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. She happened to come to this guy's field who belonged to the clan of Elimelech. So, here's the way the Bible's putting it. She has no idea. She's just doing the best that she can. In the secular mind, we would say she's just lucky. She just happened to be lucky to come to the field of a man who is a justice keeper, a righteous and godly man who will look after the widow, who is a foreigner, who is a vulnerable minority. But she had no idea that this guy is related to her in-laws' family and could possibly be somebody that could possibly marry her. She had no idea about that. And so when you read this, you know what this is saying? This is how the Bible operates. That in the sovereign moving of God, you know what providence is? You know what the word providence is? Is that God has planned all your steps. And He sees you. And He has a plan to lead you sovereignly to where He wants you to go. That's what providence is. Do you believe that? Do you think your life is mainly you? Well, yeah, that was a good job. That's why I went to go to that city. Oh, yeah, they were offering more money, so I just went to go there. Do you just believe that everywhere you go and however you just do things is just because you decided to do them? Like you believe in this American ideology, I'm the free person and I just can do whatever I want. But actually, the Bible says we do tend to operate in the things that we want to do, but there's a deeper power and a deeper plan. And that's from God. And the theologians have a word for that. It's providence. And here's the first thing I want to say to you. You have something about this question. I've taught this to my kids, and I try to say this every now and then at church. Where you go to college is not the most important decision you're going to make. What you major is not the most important decision you're going to make. Not even your job or industry is the most important decision. Actually, apart from choosing to follow Jesus, the most fundamental, the huge life course changing decision is who you marry. Did you know that? Is who you marry. And I assure you God cares. And do you believe that God can make a way for you? That there's a providence for you? Here is Ruth. She has every reason to believe there's no hope or future for me to find a husband out here. And yet, she just happens to step onto the field of the man that she doesn't know will become her husband. And that's, if you're at a place in your life where you think, this isn't going to happen for me, or I'm getting angry, or I'm getting lonely, or something like this. And there's so many young people that just feel that their life is going to get broken. I've met middle-aged people that get to that place. I don't want to embarrass anybody or anything, because if you're in that, don't look around or anything, because I'm not thinking of anybody specific in our church. But over the years, I've met men, I've met women. In our culture, it's kind of thought that it's up to you. You're the one who has to go out there and go find the love of your life. You're the one who has to be good enough looking and be most attractive and so forth. And look, nobody's telling you to just be lazy about this. Yes, you should comb your hair and make yourself presentable, etc. Okay? But in the American way, we tend to think it's on us. And then if you don't end up finding that person, somehow you should be ashamed of that. Because that's the downside in America, where if everything is on you, and you don't quite end up attaining that spouse, then people can feel, it can make people feel embarrassed or bad about that. But one I want to say to you is, you shouldn't have to feel embarrassed or bad about that. There's lots of reasons why somehow it doesn't work out for you. And there's lots of reasons that are probably not even in your control. And here is an example of somebody, Boaz, who's actually a wonderfully fine man, but he never somehow got married. And he himself did not know that by providence, his wife was going to step out onto his property, and she wasn't even going to be an Israelite. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? You just imagine if your parents thought, yes, my daughter's going to marry, and just name an ethnicity that your parents probably hated. You ever thought that? And so, he never knew that that's the way it was going to be in his life, but there it is. Let me tell you a second point that I see in this passage, which I think is incredibly helpful, which is wisdom. Wisdom that comes from faith in God's providence for you. And wisdom to look for what God wants you to look for. So here we go. Let's jump ahead to chapter 3, verse 9. So here we get this important moment. So he wakes up. Who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. That's how she proposed, okay? Being a redeemer means marry me. That's what she's saying, okay? Be a redeemer, which basically means, you should marry me, and then you'll get the land, and, you get me and everything that comes with my family. Verse 10, and he said, so this is what he said. Just think about this conversation. I didn't get too much into the details of this a few weeks ago, but think of this moment. What kind of a man reacts this way, okay? Who would say this? You wake up in the middle of the night, a good bit younger woman who's of the wrong ethnicity basically says, marry me. And this is what he says. May you be blessed by Yahweh, my daughter. That's the first thing he says. May the Lord bless you. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. When I read this passage, I don't know if some of you remember this, but just a few years back when I preached through the Biblical Justice series, I preached out of a text in the New Testament that talked about widows. What is a widow? What's a true widow? And one of the points that passage said is there are some widows who, lacking faith, would just want to end up with a man, any old man, okay? I just got to get a man. And when I read this, that's what I hear. He knows how the marriage market works. You're in a desperate place. And you know what would be normal? You just go find some younger guy. Maybe a rich guy, maybe a poor guy, but you go find a younger guy. But instead, you're willing to consider an older guy like me. And I never thought anybody would be, can you hear it? So I never really thought anybody will quite want me that way. That's kind of what I hear him saying. And this is what he says. You can tell he's quite moved. And this is what he says. And he says, not just that I would be a blessing to you, but that the Lord would be a blessing to you. And then he says this, and now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. So, here's the next pace. The first thing I want to offer all of those of you who are afraid that you're not going to find a good spouse. First, would you believe in providence for you? God doesn't just have a plan for the world. He has a plan for you. Put your name in there. A plan for SooSang. And then, here's what he also, this passage is also saying. Especially for those who will be covenant keepers, who will trust in the Lord and His love for them, and will want to do life His way. In other words, those who the Bible calls worthy, seek a worthy person. So this is what tends to happen in the world. Those who are steeped in Christ. You should look for someone steeped in Christ. You shouldn't fundamentally be looking for the best looks, the best degree, the most financially the best prospects, or the best name of the family. In this couple, none of that's on the table. She's looking at an older man, but she's looking for a worthy man. As the Bible calls it, a hayil man. That's the Hebrew word. And he recognizes you want someone who's in the Lord. And I know that you're in the Lord. I want to say something a little personal before I get to the close my message. I've known that I'm going to get to this sermon when I started this book. And every time I read this chapter 3, I think about my wife. I think about how I met Grace. And so I don't know if any of you think I'm a catch. Okay? Right? You're like, oh, okay. I don't know if any of you think I'm a catch. But to me, like, I went to a seminary, which is actually one of the worst seminaries in the whole world, Harvard. And then I was going to become a pastor, which meant I didn't have good prospects. And then I went off to this city where I didn't know too many people. And I remember this. I remember when I was 22 years old, I went to start studying at Harvard. And for the first time in my life, I found what I really wanted to study. So I was actually studying really hard. I didn't really study very hard in college. Okay? And I was studying very hard, and I was loving what I was learning. And I remember coming back to my room at 2 a.m. because I'd been studying harder than I ever had, and I had stacks of books everywhere, which I love, by the way. Okay? If you come to my house, you will know that all these books drive my wife a little nuts, but that's what it was like. And I came back to my room, and I saw all these books, and somehow it's like my life flashed before me. That if I got to the age of 40, and I came home after working really hard, and all I had was just a bunch of books waiting for me, I would get really sad and really depressed and start feeling sorry for myself. And I'm a person that hates feeling sorry for myself. I just consider that like one of the most poisonous emotions. So I just like cut that out as soon as I can. So I went, oh my gosh, I will feel so sorry for myself. I will not be able to not feel sorry for myself. So at the age of 22, it was actually the first time I actually prayed for a wife. I never did it before. So I wasn't desperate. I wasn't lonely at that moment. I was just like, Lord, I'm this nerd, and I'm going to read these hard books, and I'm probably not going to make any real money, and I'm going to a junkie seminary. Who's going to want to marry me? And if I ever become a pastor, who will really want to marry me? All right? And so you're shrinking down the pool of possible, I got to find a godly woman. I got to find a high-yield, worthy woman who isn't looking for worldly prospects, who wants someone who loves the Lord. And that's her highest thing. That's what I have to find. And how do you find that? I mean, one is, well, you should go to church. So let me just help you now. You should go to church. You want to find somebody? Maybe not try the app. Try going to church often. Okay? And try to go to a godly church. And try to find where people really pursue Christ. And by the way, at this point, we weren't at the same church. I had not met Grace. So I prayed that prayer. And I wasn't like, Lord, I got to get married. I'm praying this like every single night. I prayed it once. And I was like, I prayed it once, Lord. Okay, that's you heard it. That's the problem. It's up to you. I prayed that prayer. And a year and a half later, I did not know that I would start hanging out with this gal. And then a few months later, I'm going, uh-oh, this is trouble. I'm starting to like her. And she is a worthy woman. This is not a girl you play with. This is not a girl you merely date. If you really, really like her and love her, you better marry her. And I'm just sharing that story with you because it wasn't because I had how my brother called it, skills. That dude has skills, man. He could get girls like date him. It's not like I had skills, okay? You know what I had? I had faith in God's providence. And I really honestly wasn't that wise. But I did know that if the Lord was going to call me into ministry, I better find a high-yield woman, okay? It's the only kind who would even probably say yes, right? And so, I'm just sharing with you, this is not just some ancient Israel story. It's a very contemporary story. It was my life in 1993 when I was looking at a bunch of books and looking at the prospects of my future of being this sad, lonely bachelor. Right? If I ended up like Boaz, I would have been like so miserable. Okay? I mean, I don't know. I admire that fact that he could get however old he got and was okay with it. I was never been that okay with it. But the Lord was good. Mm-hmm. Okay? And He gave me a very, very wonderful woman. And I think many of you guys know that. In fact, I got a lot better than I deserved. Okay? Let's close. Part 3. The promise of covenant, in particular love. And here's the way I want to close. I'm talking about marriage today, but really what we're talking about is covenant. And if you've been in our church for a while, you know that, man, we care about covenant. You know what is covenant? It is a binding promise that changes your whole identity in relationships. Before I made the covenant to marry Grace, I was just a single man. I'm SooSang. Now I'm Grace's husband. I'm like my relationships have changed because my covenant has changed. And if you think I'm saying all something like, Pastor, you're spending a whole message to give us dating advice. It seems a little like a strange message, right? Let me tell you something. Marriage is not just one subject in the Bible. It is the Bible. At the beginning of the Bible, God goes, well, let's make a world. And then He puts human beings on it. What's the first thing He does? He marries them. The first gift He gives Adam is a wife. And at the flourishing of all humanity is the covenant that we call marriage. You know why? It's like our culture, because we think that it's all up to me to find my own thing and then I don't need anybody else. Like, we believe in that garbage in our culture. It's total garbage. You know what? You really need other people. And you, for the most part, 90+% of you, 98% of you probably need a spouse. And you need somebody to love you, but you know what? You need to learn how to love him or her and lay down and sacrifice your life for your spouse's sake. And it's hard. And it's painful. It will strip you of your ego and all kinds of things. But therein, and all this It's so interesting today. The secular sociologists have studied the heck out of this thing. You know what they found out? That the difference in America, generally in America, you know who are the people who are happy? Those who are happily married. A large percentage of the most happy people are the people who are happily married. So you know what it is? When God did that at the beginning of the Bible, He wasn't messing around. But here we go. Marriage covenants at the beginning of the Bible. Do you know that it's at the end of the Bible? The Bible opens with marriage. The Bible closes with marriage. And so right here, in this book, this small book, you have the drama of, will this older single man find a lovely wife? Will this young Moabite woman, who probably nobody else wants, will she find a good husband? But here's the thing I want to say to you. This is the way I want to close, and this is how we'll get to the gospel. I want to remind you of what she calls him. She says, well, you're a redeemer, so marry me. That's the way she put it. It's effectively the way she put it. And you know that in this life, we walk around and you know you need somebody to choose you. And that's, guys, you too. That before the ultimate Redeemer, we are all like, choose me. Choose me. Do you know that the hope of the marriage covenant of the gospel is that someone will be your Redeemer and He will choose you? You know, I think I've thought about the gospel in so many different ways over the years. As I think about this particular issue, here you are, you're warring with anybody choose me. I want you to think about this from every other religious point of view. In Christianity, marriage symbolizes the gospel itself. There is a broken, lost people. She is a widow. She is lost. She is a lost widow, and nobody wants her. And then there's one who will be a redeemer who will say, I will come and marry you. But if God just stays up in heaven, and says, I'll do this for you, would anybody believe that? But God shows up in person, and He pays the price to ransom His bride. And then He says, I choose you. And that price was very, very serious indeed. I gave you the wisdom from the Bible. You should seek a worthy woman or a worthy man to be your spouse. But you also know what that means? That means you should try to be a worthy man. You should try to be a worthy woman. And I know a lot of you are going, I don't know. That's tough. What if I'm not that worthy? And a lot of you probably feel like, oh man, there go that. That's where I'm going to fall short. And as we look at the other standards of all the people around the world, that's exactly where all the fear and anxiety is. But here's what the gospel says. You and I were like a widow. An unwanted widow. We're like a foreigner. Nobody wants us. But the ultimate Redeemer showed up and says, well, I went and paid. That's what the cross was. And now I choose you. Oh, wait a second. You're not worthy. But that's why I paid. You are not high yield, but I am. I will be more worthy than you ever thought. And I will make you worthy. So come to me, because I choose you. A lot of people think that if you believe in Jesus, Jesus died for the world, or He died for the church. All those things are true. But here's the thing I want to emphasize to you today. He chose you. He chose you. He didn't just have like this blank set. He providentially chose you, and then He providentially set your steps up so that you will happen one day, however you came to know Jesus, to be in that church, to be in that service, so that you can find out, well, whoa, this is actually the Redeemer that I need. So think back to that time where finally you realize, whoa, He chose you. And if that's true, don't you think that He might have a plan for you? That He can help find your grace? Right? So you can be a dumb schmuck like SooSang, and my market didn't look too good. But my God chose me. And then He chose grace for me. It could happen for you too. Can you believe that? Can you trust that? And let me just close this way for the married folks. The married folks. If your marriage is kind of, and of course, sometimes your marriage is good and sometimes it's kind of not so good, I call you to choose your spouse again and again and again. Wouldn't you want her to choose you again? Wouldn't you want him to choose you again? That's what Jesus did for us. Make your marriage great, like God's, and choose your spouse again. Let's pray. Lord, a lonely and lost people are we. And today, gosh, there's so much fear and shame and depression. I didn't even know a society could become like this. I certainly didn't think America could become like this. But I guess we have become like a Moabite land. And we have thrown you away. And we are paying the price. But today we proclaim your promises, your providence, your covenant, and the good news that the Redeemer named Jesus came to fulfill covenant when we could not. And He would have hope and a promise for us. If there's anybody here today who really needs your prayers, who needs your encouragement, who needs this word, we pray they would really hear from you. And you would bless them. And we pray, Lord, that Revive would be known as a place where people laugh and say, I didn't know I was going to end up with him. I didn't know how the Lord would choose my Boaz or my Ruth. Would there be many Boazes and Ruth in this church? And be filled with the joy that you gave them, because we have the joy of Christ. Praise in Jesus' name.